I got home in Portland 2 hours earlier than planned that evening. A small twist of fate brought on by a canceled meeting and unusually light traffic. It was one of those moments where you imagine the surprise on someone's face when they see you early, except the surprise when it came was mine. As I turned into our driveway, I noticed Lauren's SUV already parked neatly beside the garage. She had told me, in that matter-of-fact voice she uses when her plans are already cemented, that she'd be in another city for a reunion, staying out late and possibly overnight. Seeing her car, there was like catching a flash of movement in your peripheral vision. You're not sure what it means yet, but it instantly sets you on edge. The late summer evening air was warm but not stifling. Inside, though, the atmosphere shifted. It was hot, heavier somehow, as if the walls themselves had been holding in breath. The air carried an unmistakable scent. Men's cologne, sharp and spicy. The kind that doesn't just fade but settles into fabric. I had never worn it, and I knew instantly that it didn't belong to any of my friends or family. In the living room, the details began stacking up like a quiet indictment. 2 wine glasses sat on the coffee table, their stems tilted toward each other as if in mid-conversation. One glass was smudged with a distinct oval mark, the shape of male lips pressing against its rim. Lauren wasn't much of a wine drinker unless I poured it for her, and she certainly didn't pour 2 glasses for herself. I glanced toward the hallway. Our bedroom door stood halfway open, letting in a wedge of light from the setting sun. Inside, the bed looked like it had been lived in twice over. Sheets twisted into lazy spirals, her pillow indented in a way that suggested recent use. The other pillow, mine, was pushed back awkwardly, not where I'd left it that morning. Then my eyes caught on something that rooted me to the spot. A shirt draped carelessly over the arm of the chair by the window. It wasn't mine. I didn't recognize the brand, but the size, the cut, and the faint warmth still clinging to it told me more than I wanted to know. It had been worn recently, maybe within the hour. From the bathroom came the muffled hum of a hairdryer. I stood in the hallway, listening to it, my mind cataloging the scene. The car, the cologne, the glasses, the rumpled sheets, the shirt. It was too much to be nothing and too specific to be coincidence. The hum stopped. For a moment, there was silence, and then the door opened. Lauren stepped out, dressed in casual home clothes, loose sweats, an old t-shirt, her hair still damp at the ends. She moved with the kind of calm you don't see in people who've been startled. No quick explanation, no wide-eyed stammering. Instead, she seemed almost prepared. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the shirt on the chair, the glasses on the table, and then back to me. She made no move to hide them. If anything, her lack of reaction was more unnerving than any frantic attempt to cover them up. "Oh," she said lightly, as though she hadn't expected me until much later. "You're home early." "Traffic was clear," I replied, my voice flatter than I intended. She offered a small smile, measured, polished, like a customer service representative trying to keep the interaction short but pleasant. Then came her explanation, delivered with a steady, almost bored rhythm. Apparently, one of her old colleagues had been in town unexpectedly. He'd stopped by for a quick drink before heading back to his hotel. She didn't bother to offer a name, and she didn't stumble once in her delivery, which made me suspect she'd already rehearsed it. "I didn't think it was a big deal to mention," she added, tucking her hair behind her ear. "You were supposed to be gone until late." She stepped past me toward the kitchen, as though that was the end of it. No elaboration. No apology for the shirt that was still radiating warmth like a cooling ember. I followed her with my eyes but didn't move. Part of me wanted to press her, to ask for the name, the timeline, to watch her face while she scrambled for details. But another part of me, the part that's been through enough arguments to recognize a dead end, knew it wouldn't matter. If this was a lie, it was one she'd already constructed carefully enough to survive the first round of questioning. Instead, I let the silence stretch between us, letting her explanation hang in the air alongside the cologne, both fading but still unmistakable. I told myself it could all be innocent, but the thought didn't land. My eyes kept drifting back to that shirt on the chair, the wine glass with the faint lip mark, the memory of her saying she'd be miles away tonight. It's strange how, in moments like that, your mind starts replaying other days, other conversations, in light of what you've just seen. The weight of every small, odd moment suddenly presses down all at once. But I swallowed it back. Not now. Not yet. She poured herself water, leaned against the counter, and met my gaze just long enough to see if I'd challenge her. When I didn't, she gave me that same faint, dismissive smile and looked away. If this was a test, I wasn't ready to show my cards. After that night, something inside me started rewinding, as though I'd been handed a remote for my own life and was now scrubbing backward through months I'd lived without paying close enough attention. It wasn't that Lauren and I had been perfect before. Marriage isn't a continuous honeymoon, but there had been a rhythm, a set of unspoken habits that made up the texture of our life. Now, looking back, I realized those small pieces had started vanishing one by one, and I'd let them slip away without asking why. I started noticing the phone first. It had become her constant companion. She'd take it into the bathroom, into the shower, setting it on the counter where the steam curled around it. Once, I caught myself staring at the faint outline of the phone through the frosted glass of the shower door, realizing I'd never seen her do that before. And it wasn't just that it was always with her, it was always locked. New password. No more idle notifications lighting up the screen. When we first got together, she'd leave her phone lying around, face up, buried under receipts or half-finished grocery lists. Now it was always within arm's reach, face down. She'd glance at it like someone checking a watch when they were eager for the hour to come, and her fingers moved across the screen quickly, like she was trying to answer before I could possibly see what it said. She'd started working late more often too. It was never presented as a request, just a matter-of-fact statement over coffee in the morning. And it wasn't every night, not enough to set off alarms in isolation, but in a slow, creeping way that made it seem routine. Then there were the sudden errands, the quick meetups with friends I'd never met, names that appeared and disappeared without detail. She never once invited me along. One Saturday, while dropping something into the passenger seat of her SUV, I saw a paper receipt wedged between the console and the seatbelt buckle. It was from a wine bar I'd never heard of, a place that, according to the date, she had visited 2 nights earlier, the same evening she'd told me she was grabbing dinner with her coworker Emily. The total was for 2 glasses of wine and a shared dessert. I didn't mention it at the time, but the image of that receipt burned into my mind. Other things began to surface. Scarves with a perfume I didn't recognize, light and floral, not her usual scent. New clothes that appeared in her closet with no shopping bags in sight. When I asked about them, she'd shrug, saying she found them on sale or that she'd picked them up while running errands. Then there were the absences in our routine. We used to have small, almost invisible rituals that stitched our days together. Her leaning against me in the morning while I poured coffee, the 2 of us listening to the same playlist on the speaker while making dinner, the little post-it notes she'd leave on the fridge when she left before me. One by one, those disappeared. Now, she cooked with earbuds in, smiling to herself at something I couldn't hear. The earbuds were a change too. Before, she liked sharing music, asking me to listen to a new song she'd found. Now, her playlists were hers alone, locked away in that small, private bubble between her and whatever was playing. I asked once what she was listening to, and she pulled out one earbud for less than a second, letting me hear a vague hum of something unfamiliar, before sliding it back in and changing the subject. Laundry told its own story. One evening, I pulled clothes from the dryer and found a pair of men's sweatpants mixed in. They were too big for me, too long in the leg with a brand I'd never worn. When I held them up, she glanced over from the sink and said they belonged to a colleague, left in her car after some after-work project. The explanation was breezy, but the detail snagged in my head. That colleague lived in another state. Her smile changed too. It used to be warm and unguarded, but now it had the formality of a customer service greeting, something practiced rather than felt. Conversations grew shorter, her tone cooler, as though she were deliberately rationing her presence. When I reached for her hand on the couch, she'd adjust her posture in a way that made it feel awkward to keep holding on. I started lying awake at night, replaying these moments like a bad film reel. My brain made a catalog. Locked phone, new clothes, wine bar receipt. Men's sweatpants. Missing rituals. Different perfume. Changed smile. One evening, I tried to bridge the gap. I brought home takeout from her favorite Thai place, the one with the neon lotus in the window, and set the table before she got home. She walked in, smiled briefly, and said, "Oh, thanks," in a tone that sounded more like someone acknowledging an errand than a gesture. She ate quietly, answering my small talk with clipped sentences. It wasn't until later, when she disappeared into the bedroom with her phone, that I realized I didn't even know what she'd done that day. My mind became its own detective, pulling small memories from months earlier and holding them up to the light. Back in early spring, she'd gone on a work retreat at the coast. She'd sent me a single photo from the trip, a sh*T of the sunset over the water. No people, no landmarks. At the time, I'd thought it was beautiful. Now, I wondered who had been standing just out of frame. Sometimes I caught myself staring at her across the room, trying to spot a crack in whatever mask she was wearing. But Lauren was careful. If something had changed, she was making sure it didn't change too suddenly. It's strange how the mind works when it suspects something but doesn't have proof. Every detail feels like both nothing and everything. You want to believe you're overthinking, but the pattern is there, faint but undeniable, like water staining through paint. By the end of that second week after the colleague visit, I knew I was watching the slow construction of a wall between us. I didn't know what was on the other side yet, but I could feel her deliberately adding bricks. And every day she seemed to step just a little further back, making sure the distance stayed intact. It was a Tuesday when the first undeniable crack appeared. Not just a suspicion or a string of odd details, but something solid enough to hold in my hands. When I opened the mailbox that afternoon, among the usual bills and flyers was a thick, unmarked envelope. No return address, no handwriting, just my name typed neatly in the center. It was heavier than regular mail, the kind that makes you pause before tearing it open. Standing at the curb, I slid a finger under the flap. Inside was a single photograph, glossy and sharp. It showed Lauren seated at a corner table in an upscale coastal restaurant, the kind of place we'd only visited for anniversaries. She was leaning forward, her hand clasped tightly in the hand of a man I'd never seen before. Mid-40s maybe, well-groomed, wearing a light jacket over a crisp button-down. Their eyes were locked on each other, and their expressions carried that private softness reserved for people who don't have to explain why they're smiling. In the corner of the photo was a digital date stamp. I stared at it for a full 10 seconds before my brain processed what it meant. That date was the night she told me she was at a countryside spa with friends, an event I had never been invited to and hadn't questioned at the time. I slid the photo back into the envelope like it might burn me if I held it too long. Whoever sent it had given me no note, no explanation, just the image. And they were right. There was nothing else to say. That evening, I sat on the couch with the envelope on the coffee table in front of me, watching the shadows lengthen across the room. Lauren came home later than usual, tossing her keys in the bowl by the door and giving me a brief, neutral hey. I didn't ask where she'd been. I didn't mention the photo. Not yet. It wasn't until 2 nights later that I found more. She'd left her tablet on the kitchen counter while she took a shower, its screen still lit. I didn't go looking for anything. The messages were already there, the notification bar wide open like a door someone forgot to close. I saw the name before I saw the words. Caleb. Scrolling revealed months of messages between them. They weren't coded or careful. They didn't have to be. The tone was int asterisk mate, the kind you can't fake. There were admissions of love, late-night wish-you-were-here messages, and casual discussions about which weekends she could get away. They shared hotel booking links, traded photos of places they wanted to visit together, and spoke about me in clipped, dismissive terms. One message from her read, "He's predictable. He'll never ask the right questions." Convenient. My chest tightened, but I kept scrolling. Caleb's responses mirrored her tone. Teasing, confident, always assuming she was his in every meaningful way. There were jokes about my habits, complaints about my work hours, and a thread about how eventually she'd find the right moment to change her life. In another conversation, they discussed a weekend trip to Bend. She told me that same weekend she'd been on a last-minute girls' trip to Seattle. I could remember her coming home from that one with a light tan, wearing a new scarf that still smelled faintly of the same floral perfume I'd noticed weeks earlier. I closed the tablet and set it exactly where I'd found it, as if returning a stolen object. My mind was a blur of fury and clarity, each thought cutting cleaner than the last. This wasn't a hunch anymore. This wasn't a misplaced shirt or a suspicious receipt. This was proof. A full-color photograph. A string of unguarded messages. A timeline that matched perfectly with every unexplained absence. The strangest part was the calm that came over me. In the movies, this is where the betrayed spouse storms into the bathroom, throws the tablet on the counter, and demands an explanation. But that night I said nothing. Lauren came out of the shower in a towel, humming to herself, and walked right past me into the bedroom. I didn't trust myself to speak. Not because I was afraid of losing my temper, but because I knew that the first words out of my mouth would decide everything. If I played this wrong, she'd twist it, minimize it, make herself the injured party. She was good at that. I'd seen her do it to others. So I sat there, still as stone, while she dressed for bed and scrolled through her phone. She kissed me on the cheek like nothing had happened. I stayed quiet. That night I didn't sleep much. Instead, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, cataloging everything I knew now and how I knew it. The photograph, the date stamp, the messages, the corroborating details from months of small, seemingly harmless incidents. I thought about Caleb, how easily he fit into the role of someone's secret, how confidently he spoke about me without ever meeting me. I pictured them at that restaurant, hands entwined, laughing quietly over some shared thought. And I thought about the person who sent the photograph. A friend? An enemy of hers? Someone else who'd been watching? The absence of any identifying mark felt intentional, like they wanted to expose the truth without becoming part of it. By morning, the first wave of shock had settled into something colder. Resolve. This wasn't going to be a screaming match. This wasn't going to be a half hour of her rehearsed lines followed by my hollow concessions. I was done giving her space to rewrite the story. Still, I didn't confront her. Not yet. I needed more, not because I doubted what I'd seen, but because I wanted her own words and actions to be the noose. I wanted to know where she'd been, with whom, and how she justified it to herself when she wasn't crafting careful explanations for me. Over the next week, I became deliberate. I paid closer attention to her departures and arrivals, to what she wore and whether she changed before leaving. I noted the small inconsistencies, the quick glances at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking, the half-smile that flickered when a new message arrived. She didn't notice the difference in me, or if she did, she mistook it for something else. That suited me fine. For years, I'd been the one in our marriage who trusted first, asked later. Now, for the first time, I was holding my questions close. And I knew when I finally asked them, I'd already have the answers. The morning after I read those messages, I made a quiet promise to myself. I would not give Lauren the satisfaction of a dramatic scene. No slammed doors, no shouted accusations. If I was going to end this, it would be on my terms, with every detail locked down so tightly that she couldn't wriggle out of it. The first step was evidence, more than enough to prove not only what she'd done, but when, where, and with whom. The photograph and messages were already damning, but I wanted a complete record. Not just for me. For anyone who might become involved later, a lawyer, a mediator, even her family if it came to that. I started building a file. On my laptop, I created a folder buried 3 layers deep under generic work documents. Inside, I stored the photograph, **TS of her messages with Caleb, and a text document with dates, times, and brief descriptions of every suspicious event going back 3 months. It was meticulous work, and it kept my mind from spiraling into the what-ifs that wanted to take over. The second step was to get legal clarity. I called my sister Carol, who'd been a family lawyer for over a decade. She didn't gasp or stutter when I told her what I'd found. She asked a few direct questions, listened to my answers, and then said, "We can handle this cleanly, but you have to stay disciplined. No big confrontation. No giving her a chance to spin this before you're ready." We met for lunch 2 days later in a quiet corner booth of a diner neither of us normally visited. Carol brought her laptop and a calm efficiency that made me realize just how much I needed her help. She began drafting a preliminary divorce agreement while I filled in the blanks: assets, accounts, property, and any debts that might complicate the split. "Do you want to fight for the house?" she asked without looking up from the keyboard. "Yes," I said immediately. "I don't want to leave it to her. Too many things here are mine. Too much of me is here." We talked through spousal support, division of savings, and the legal weight of documented infidelity. Carol explained that in Oregon, while no-fault divorce is standard, proof of an affair can influence settlement negotiations, especially if the other party knows they have no defense. "Once you put this in front of her," Carol said, tapping the draft with her pen, "it's not a conversation, it's a fact. She'll understand she has no leverage." By the end of lunch, we had a solid draft. All that was left was to finalize the evidence list and have the papers ready for immediate presentation when I decided the time was right. The third step was to protect my own position. I went through our joint accounts, noting balances and recent transactions. I set up a new checking account in my name alone and redirected my paycheck there. I updated passwords on my personal email, cloud storage, and even my streaming accounts, not because I thought she'd tamper with them, but because I wanted the psychological clean break. Lauren noticed none of it. Or if she did, she didn't connect the dots. She was still playing her role, alternating between detached politeness and the occasional manufactured sweetness, as if sprinkling in a few kind gestures would keep suspicion at bay. One evening, she mentioned casually that she might have to travel for work again. 2 nights in Bend this time. I nodded, smiled faintly, and told her I hoped it would be productive. Inside, I was already noting the dates. A few days before her supposed trip, I decided to stage a quiet test. I reached out to her boss, Eric, under the pretext of wanting to discuss a charity fundraiser their company had supported in the past. I invited him to dinner downtown, choosing a restaurant where the booths offered a good view of the street. Eric arrived on time, and within minutes, I steered the conversation toward Lauren's work schedule. It didn't take much prompting for him to tell me, without knowing why I was asking, that Lauren had been taking unusual absences lately. "She'll say she's in the field, but sometimes I can't reach her for hours," he said. "Not my business as long as the work gets done, but it's irregular." While he spoke, I glanced out the window and noticed a familiar SUV parked across the street. Lauren's. She was there, watching us. It took effort to keep my expression neutral. I didn't acknowledge her or let on to Eric what I'd seen. If she was here to catch me in something, anything, then the best move was to let her stew in uncertainty. I kept the conversation light, thanked Eric for meeting me, and left without so much as glancing toward her car. The fourth step was patience. I let a week pass, making no changes to my routine, giving her no reason to think I was building toward anything. But in that week, I finalized every document. Carol reviewed the divorce agreement twice, tightening the language and ensuring the asset split was clear. I printed hard copies of the evidence, organizing them into a neat binder that I kept locked in my desk. On a quiet Thursday evening, I slid the finalized agreement into the top drawer of that desk, leaving it partially open. I knew Lauren sometimes rifled through my things, always under the pretense of looking for stamps or scissors or something equally mundane. That night, I didn't have to wait long. I was in the kitchen rinsing dishes when I heard the faint scrape of the drawer upstairs. Silence followed, the kind that swells in a room when someone's eyes are locked on something they weren't meant to find. When she came down, she said nothing. Her face was composed, but her eyes betrayed the shock. I didn't speak either. The silence was the point. No confrontation, no debate, just the quiet shift of power, the unspoken message that I already knew everything and was simply choosing not to ask her about it. Later, I heard her moving around the bedroom for longer than usual before bed. Drawers opening and closing, a faint rustle of paper. She was searching, maybe for more documents, maybe for proof that she still had some control over the narrative. She wouldn't find any. The next morning, she left early, avoiding eye contact. I poured my coffee, sat at the table, and let the stillness settle. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't reacting to her moves. She was reacting to mine. This wasn't about winning. It was about making sure that when the ending came, it was mine to deliver. The week after she found the divorce agreement in my desk drawer was different. Not in loud, obvious ways, but in the smaller currents that ran beneath our daily life. Lauren moved with an edge now, a slight stiffness in her posture, as if she was bracing for impact. She stopped leaving her phone unattended, even for a moment. If she needed to step into the other room, it came with the quiet shuffle of that device sliding into her pocket. Her smiles, already a little too formal in recent months, became rarer, replaced by watchful glances that tried to read what I was thinking. I gave her nothing, no confrontation, no questions, just the quiet, unshakable calm of someone who'd already made their decision. If she wanted to wonder what I knew, how much I'd seen, and when I might use it, that was her burden to carry now. Still, I wanted to be sure she understood the shift wasn't accidental. I planned a small but deliberate move. It started with an invitation. I reached out to her boss, Eric, again. This time with no pretext beyond dinner. We picked a restaurant downtown, the kind with wide front windows and a clear view of the street. I didn't choose the place for the food. I chose it because I knew there was nowhere nearby to park discreetly if someone was watching. We met at 6:30. Eric was punctual as always, settling into the booth across from me. We talked about work, about a few shared acquaintances, and about nothing that could possibly be mistaken for scandal. There was no plotting, no exchanging of confidential details, just two people having a professional meal. But in the reflection of the glass behind him, I caught a glimpse of something I had expected. Lauren's SUV, parked diagonally across the street. I didn't look at it directly. I didn't need to. She was there. Eric, unaware, kept the conversation flowing. At one point, he casually confirmed something I already suspected, that Lauren's work absences hadn't always matched the stories she told me. She's good at her job, he said, but she's been more flexible with her schedule lately. His tone wasn't judgmental, just factual. He didn't seem to connect it to anything deeper. I nodded, made a neutral comment about work-life balance, and changed the subject. All the while, I knew that Lauren might be sitting in her car, wondering if we were talking about her, if we were sharing something she couldn't control. That uncertainty was the point. When the check came, I paid without hesitation and thanked Eric for his time. As we stepped outside, the evening air felt crisp against my skin. I didn't look toward her car. I walked to my own, started the engine, and drove away as if she'd never been there. If she followed me home, I didn't notice. Or maybe I just didn't care. The following days were a study in restraint. Lauren hovered more, asking small, meaningless questions about my day, my plans, my mood. I answered politely but without warmth, offering nothing for her to work with. She seemed to be probing for clues, hoping I'd slip and reveal whether the agreement in my desk was a bluff or a certainty. Once, she asked if we could take a trip, just the two of us, to get back on track. The suggestion was so out of place that I almost laughed. Instead, I told her I was too busy at work for a vacation. The truth was, I wasn't interested in fixing something she'd already dismantled in secret. At night, I could hear her moving in bed beside me, restless. More than once, I caught her watching me when she thought I was asleep. I'd keep my breathing slow and steady, wondering what she saw when she looked at me now. Did she see the man she'd once chosen, or the one she'd underestimated? The silence was working. It was doing what no confrontation could have achieved. It was forcing her to live in the same uncertainty she'd cultivated for me. The opportunity to push this further came unexpectedly. One afternoon, Carol called with a suggestion. "You've got the agreement ready. Why not make her realize she's not the only one capable of controlling the narrative?" "How?" I asked. "Let her see you in a position where she doesn't know what's being said about her. Not speculation, just let her imagination fill in the blanks." The timing lined up perfectly. A client of mine had invited me to a small networking event, a rooftop gathering at a hotel downtown. It wasn't the sort of place Lauren and I ever went together, and it wasn't somewhere she could easily pass by without deliberate effort. I attended with the same calm I'd been practicing for weeks, mingling with acquaintances and making a point to be seen in conversation with people she didn't know. I noticed, near the edge of the terrace, a familiar silhouette leaning casually against the railing. She wasn't part of the event. She was watching from the sidewalk below, head tilted slightly upward toward the group. I didn't acknowledge her. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a signal, even something as small as a glance. Instead, I laughed at something a colleague said, shook a few hands, and made my exit without ever breaking stride. That night, she didn't mention the event. Neither did I. The air between us was thick, but the balance had shifted. She was no longer the sole author of the story we were living. It was strange, liberating, even, to realize I didn't need to trap her in a confession. She already knew I knew, and the longer she sat with that knowledge, the more she would understand that her grip on the situation was gone. By the weekend, I was certain of one thing. When the moment came to end this, it wouldn't be loud. It would be quiet, sharp, and impossible for her to undo. For now, silence was my sharpest tool.